This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. 2 people now known to have died from volcanic eruption and tsunami in Tonga. Iran's diplomats set to reopen the country's representative office to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Saudi Arabia. And a record number of daily COVID deaths reported in Australia. Tonga has confirmed the second death caused by an underwater volcanic eruption and tsunami that hit the South Pacific country on Saturday. The first confirmed victim was a British citizen. With communications still hampered, the true death toll and extent of damage are not yet known. The underwater volcanic eruption triggered a tsunami across Pacific coastlines from Japan to the United States. Phone lines are still down and an undersea internet cable between Tonga and Fiji has been cut. Only fragments of information have filtered out via a handful of satellite phones on the islands.
The ash is proving quite problematic, not just for water and sanitation, because Tonga collects its water from the roofs of households, but in terms of access for the aid from Australia and New Zealand and other flights, they need to clear the runway. Latest information I have is that 60% of the runway has been cleared, and this is done manually. I hear up to 200 volunteers are sweeping the runway in preparation for the supplies to land on Thursday or Friday if things happen according to plan.
Well, our correspondent Owen Poland has more on the devastating tsunami from Auckland in New Zealand.
The Tongan government has declared an official state of emergency after last weekend's eruption and tsunami, and there are now unconfirmed reports that 3 people have died in Tonga as a result of that. The only victim identified so far is a 50-year-old British woman, Angela Glover, who co-founded Tonga's Animal Welfare Society, and she was tragically swept away by the tsunami while she was trying to save some dogs. Meanwhile, aerial surveys conducted by the New Zealand and Australian Air Forces have discovered significant damage on the west coast of Tonga's main island of Tongatapu, where the popular Ha'atafu beach resort has been completely destroyed and many dozens of homes have simply been washed away. Well, scientists here in New Zealand that study these things have been warning that there is a possibility of further eruptions in the weeks and possibly even years ahead. But so far there have been 2 smaller eruptions since Saturday's big blast, which has been described as the biggest in the world in the past 30 years. New satellite images show that the volcanic island has now been almost completely wiped from the face of the earth, although there have been no reports of more tsunami like the ones that caused so much destruction a few days ago.
Now, at least 26 people have been killed in a strong earthquake which hit western Afghanistan on Monday. The China Earthquake Networks Center said the magnitude 5.4 tremor took place at 4 p.m. local time in Badghis province. A local official said 5 women and 4 children are among the victims. They died when the roofs of their houses collapsed. 4 more were injured. Authorities said more than 700 houses were damaged. Iranian diplomats have arrived in Saudi Arabia to reopen Iran's representative office of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The office was closed 6 years ago following a diplomatic rift. Tehran says it's also ready to reopen its embassy in the kingdom, but it depends on practical efforts by Riyadh. The 2 countries cut ties in 2016 when angry protesters attacked Saudi diplomatic missions in Iran after Riyadh executed a renowned Shia cleric. Saudi Arabia then responded by cutting ties with Tehran, and OIC foreign ministers condemned the violence. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has returned home to face charges of high treason, stoking fears of internal divisions. CGTN's Guy Henderson now reports from Kiev.
For a moment at the airport, Petro Poroshenko wasn't even certain his country would let him back in. Eventually, the leader of Ukraine's European Solidarity Party did make it through. Addressing supporters outside court in central Kiev, Poroshenko remained defiant. Who is hunting the opposition and using selective justice, he said. Who is ruining the rule of law and ruining democracy. He accuses his rival, President Volodymyr Zelensky, of trying to bring him down.
Ukraine's former president faces charges of high treason that could land him with a 15-year jail sentence and rule him out of a run for office in 2 years' time.
Back in 2014, state prosecutors say the then president brokered a deal to buy coal from the rebel-controlled east amid a shortage of fuel. That, they claim, helped fund separatists that Kiev is still fighting against. With Russian troops massed on the border and talk of war, Germany's foreign minister was also here on Monday. Amid concern this case could deepen divisions between two pro-Western camps at the worst possible time. Annalena Baerbock heads to Moscow next, though, hoping there may still be a chance to de-escalate.
Every renewed aggression, and we have repeatedly said so, would have a high price. We are ready to enter a serious dialogue with Russia because diplomacy is the only possible way to defuse the current, highly dangerous situation.
But as its allies call for unity, Ukraine's already complex political landscape may be about to get even more complicated. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Kiev.
Elsewhere, in his World Economic Forum virtual address, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the world is experiencing a fragile economic recovery. He warned against leaving any country behind.
The world is emerging from the depths of a paralyzing economic crisis, but recovery remains fragile and uneven amid the lingering pandemic, persistent labor market challenges, ongoing supply chain disruptions, rising inflation, and looming debt traps, not to mention the geopolitical divide.
Well, Guterres also urged world leaders to focus on what he termed as urgent areas. These are health, education, decent work, and social protection, saying these sectors are crucial to any country's economy.
Health, education, decent work, and social protection are not only human rights, they collectively represent a country's economic engine. And in developing countries right now, this engine is stalled with dire consequences for people's livelihoods, especially for women and youth. The global financial system has failed them when they need it most. And global solidarity is missing in action.
Australia has reported a record number of daily COVID-19 deaths. 74 people have died in the past 24 hours in the country's three most populous states, that's New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. The New South Wales government has ruled out a return to lockdown to counter the Omicron variant. Victoria has declared an emergency in hospitals to cope with surging patient admissions and a shortage of staff. Meanwhile, the Chinese mainland has reported 127 new local COVID-19 cases. 102 of them were in the central province of Henan. The southern province of Guangdong reported 5 cases. Beijing and the northwestern province of Shanxi reported 1 case each. Shaanxi's capital, Xi'an, which was the epicenter of this latest outbreak, is slowly emerging from its lockdown. Local authorities have announced public transportation will resume in phases. Earlier, we spoke to our reporter Sun Tianyuan in Beijing about the capital's new case.
The new case in Beijing was a close contact of the first patient reported on Saturday, and they live in the same community. The second person tested positive Monday with mild symptoms and is now in the hospital. Now, Beijing's health authorities say the first patient had not been out of the city in the 14 days before her infection was confirmed, and she was likely infected by viruses found in a document that she received from abroad. It arrived from Canada via the U.S. and Hong Kong, and medical workers collected 22 samples from the parcel, and all of them tested positive. The CDC said lab results had shown that the genome is highly similar to certain Omicron strains in North America and in Singapore. The CDC reminded the public to wear masks and disposable gloves when opening mail from abroad, and authorities said they would also ramp up disinfection at postal facilities. Workers who handle international mail will also get tested at least twice a week. And meanwhile, the Spring Festival, or Chinese New Year travel rush, also known as Chunyun, began Monday, and the Ministry of Transport is forecasting nearly 1.2 billion trips during the 40-day period. An estimated 30 million trips are moving across the country every day. So authorities say keeping millions of passengers safe from the virus remains the top priority, and passengers need to have their health codes checked and may need to present negative test results before and after arrival, depending on local requirements. The Beijing Daxing International Airport, for example, has set up a 24-hour test site, and travelers can be tested without an appointment there and have the results ready in 2 to 4 hours. Now, China's railway regulators say they will also suspend or reduce trains serving areas reporting cases.
Now, a preliminary study in Israel shows a fourth COVID-19 vaccine dose is not enough to prevent Omicron infections. Compared to a control group with 3 shots, the group with a 4th shot showed an increase in the number of antibodies. However, experts from Sheba Medical Center say it's still not enough for Omicron. Researchers used both Pfizer and Moderna boosters. The hospital says the findings are the first of its kind, though only preliminary and not yet published. Last month, Israel started offering a 4th shot or a 2nd booster to its most vulnerable and high-risk groups. Well, that does it for this edition of The World Today. Thanks for watching. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown. As they do so,
there are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping's call for international cooperation and integration elicits positive reactions from Africa. Malians share their experience of living under tough economic sanctions imposed by regional bloc ECOWAS. And we tell you why Kenya's capital city runs a high risk of facing environmental and food supply challenges. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, Southern Africa region is set for economic rebound this year after COVID-induced downturns in 2020 and 2021. And in sports, tournament hosts Cameroon stride into the last 16 of the Africa Cup of Nations. Welcome to Africa Live. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for international cooperation and integration. He was speaking on Monday to an online gathering of the World Economic Forum's Davos agenda. Feng Yilei has the details.
President Xi Jinping champions economic globalization to the international community at the World Economic Forum that looks to address critical challenges facing the world today. He referred to changes and pandemic unseen in a century, but said globalization is unstoppable.
Economic globalization is the trend of the times. Though counter currents are sure to exist in a river, no one can stop it from flowing to the sea. Countries around the world should uphold true multilateralism. We should remove barriers, not erect walls. We should open up, not close off. We should seek integration, not decoupling. This is the way to build an open world economy.
Xi Jinping spoke of China's solution to major pressing issues, how to beat the pandemic and how to rebuild a post-COVID world. He said countries of the world should learn from comparing long history cycles and foster new opportunities on the basis of mutual respect and finding win-win common ground.
Facts have shown once again that amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis, countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but are rather all in a giant ship, carrying our shared destiny.
It is the third time for Xi to stress the importance of upholding openness and solidarity at the forum. Last year, the Chinese president championed multilateralism amid a global crisis. And in 2017, he strongly advocated for economic globalization and warned against protectionism.
The Chinese president expressed confidence in China's economy. The latest economic data show that China's growth far exceeded the government's targets last year. Despite economic pressure on the horizon, Xi Jinping says China will not grow at the cost of environment or its people's well-being.
As a rising tide lifts all boats, everyone will get a fair share from development, and development gains will benefit all our people in a more substantial and equitable way.
The Chinese leader also called on the world to do everything necessary to emerge from the shadow of the pandemic and boost economic and social recovery and development. Feng Yilei, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, in his address, the Chinese president stressed the need for multilateralism. This is a view echoed by many experts on the continent. Let's now go to South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria to get some reactions to President Xi's speech.
It was very comprehensive, and it reflects also sincerely and seriously what the world is at the moment going through, what is going in the world now. He actually captures all the challenges and the problems and the opportunities. In other words, he says we can solve all the problems if we know how to collaborate, if we know how to work together. And he says even this challenge we face now has brought us together, but we need to continue to, all right, to work together to solve not only this problem, but any new future problems. So I think it's a fascinating, to be honest with you, it's a very fascinating speech that he gave. Very, very good.
The $40 billion commitment made at FOCAC a month ago, that's excellent initiative. I would urge the US and Europe to follow up on that. I think the 40 billion of investments and financing over the next 3 years, because what Africa needs actually more than aid right now is FDI and financial support to accelerate the growth, the transformation of Africa. Okay, those kinds of initiatives, I think, will help.
I've always seen China as one of the emerging economies that's actually pushing to bridge the global divide. If you look at the level of infrastructure investment China has made in third world countries, including Africa, and President Xi also made mention that they had actually given out about 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines. Those are practical ways of bridging the economic divide, the divide between the developed and African countries or other emerging economies.
Well, in his World Economic Forum virtual address, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the world is experiencing a fragile economic recovery. He warned against leaving any country behind.
The world is emerging from the depths of a paralyzing economic crisis, but recovery remains fragile and uneven amid the lingering pandemic, persistent labor market challenges, ongoing supply chain disruptions, rising inflation, and looming debt traps, not to mention the geopolitical divide.
Well, Guterres also urged world leaders to focus on what he termed as urgent areas. These are health, education, decent work, and social protection, saying these sectors are crucial to any country's economy.
Health, education, decent work, and social protection are not only human rights, they collectively represent a country's economic engine. And in developing countries right now, this engine is stalled with dire consequences for people's livelihoods, especially for women and youth. The global financial system has failed them when they need it most. And global solidarity is missing in action.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. It's time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's coming up when we return. Malians share their experience of living under tough economic sanctions imposed by regional bloc ECOWAS. And we'll tell you why Kenya's capital city runs a high risk of facing environmental and food supply challenges. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on Africa Live. Now, it is the first day after Mali's deadline to airlines to confirm their service with the country's National Civil Aviation Agency or lose their time slots. Regional airlines such as Air Côte d'Ivoire and Air Burkina, as well as Air France, as well as the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali, have already halted services. For more on this, let's now cross live to the Ghanaian capital, where Nabil Ahmed Rufai is standing by for us. Nabil, are the member countries of ECOWAS concerned by threats by Mali to cancel time slots allocated to these airlines?
Well, Mahia, it really does not appear that the ECOWAS member countries are concerned about this pushback by the Malian authority. And of course, as you rightly said, the deadline is today, and there's no word from these member countries as to whether they would want something to be done about it. Because, you know, when ECOWAS took the decision to shut its land and air borders to Mali, it actually said it was going to stick to that main sanction until some amicable resolution between ECOWAS and Mali is arrived at with regard to the timeline to hold elections to take the country back to a civilian government. So indeed, as you said also, the national carriers for Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast immediately actually canceled their flights to Bamako when ECOWAS took that decision to shut its land and air borders. And they are actually sticking to this regardless of the pushback from the Malian Authority and the timeline with regard to cancelling their flight slots if they do not hear from them. So they are not really concerned. They are bent on carrying out with the sanctions that have been agreed by the West African leaders here in Accra some few days ago, Mahia.
And Nabil, looking at possible avenues, what more then can ECOWAS do if sanctions imposed on Mali then fail to dissuade military authorities from holding on to power?
Well, for now, it's quite difficult to say what next the ECOWAS regional bloc would take. I don't know if they actually foresaw this pushback by the Malian Authority, because these sanctions that were imposed are quite tougher than the earlier one that were imposed after the coup by the military junta. So this perhaps would take the ECOWAS authorities, ECOWAS leaders aback because they would least expect such a pushback from the transitional authority. But then it remains to be seen what further actions they would really take now that things are going in this direction. But when they met in Accra a few days ago, they actually said they would only lift these sanctions if they are able to reach an agreement with the transitional authority on how soon the country can hold elections to take Mali back to a civilian government. And one can say that these sanctions that have been imposed on Mali, both economic and shutting their land and air borders to the country and also freezing their financial assets, are quite harsh. And we are not able to even tell what further sanctions will be imposed on Mali now that the transitional authorities have taken this route to really protest these sanctions by the ECOWAS leaders. So it's really a tough one to state exactly what the next line of action of ECOWAS would be now that things are taking this direction, Maya.
All right, Nabil, thank you very much for those insights. Nabil Rufai joining us live from the Ghanaian capital, Accra. Well, staying with Mali, it's been a week since ECOWAS imposed extensive economic sanctions on the country. The landlocked nation relies on its neighbors for international trade. CGTN's Asta Tal takes a look at how Malians are coping with the embargo.
Previous ECOWAS sanctions had targeted members of the ruling junta and their families. But the sanctions imposed on the 9th of January threatened to directly impact the country's economy. The restrictions have also affected travel, with ECOWAS member countries except Guinea closing their borders with Mali.
Mali is under embargo, and that's not good for us. We have a huge problem getting people into the sub-region. The Ivorians, Senegalese, and several other nationals from the sub-region were stuck here. They can't go home because the borders are closed. You see, the ECOWAS sanctions have not only a negative impact on the Malian people, but also on the populations of the sub-region.
ECOWAS sanctions, however, do not target critical consumer goods. These include fuel, medicine, food, and supplies for COVID-19 response. It, however, effectively freezes Mali's assets in commercial banks.
ECOWAS could have simply frozen the assets of the members of the National Transitional Council, but extending sanctions to the state of Mali means the ECOWAS wants to prevent the payment of Malian civil servants. When we prevent the payment of civil servants, it is as if it is the people as a whole that we have decided to sanction. Yet ECOWAS says the sanctions are not meant to hit the people of Mali, but rather its authorities. Freezing Mali's assets also means punishing private companies because the banks will not be able to meet the needs of these companies.
The regional body has defended the sanctions, deeming them necessary after Mali's military junta failed to meet the February deadline to hold elections. The military junta instead announced a 5-year extension. In addition to the ECOWAS embargo, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says the body will fall in line with the regional body's sanctions on Mali. Asta Tal, CGTN.
To Sudan now, where several demonstrators have been killed and others injured after thousands took to the streets in Khartoum and elsewhere in the country to protest against military rule. Wilkista Nyabwa has more details.
Thousands of protesters once again tried to reach the presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum. But security officers reportedly tried to clear the demonstrators from the scene by dispersing them with tear gas and live bullets. This led to some deaths, while many demonstrators were seriously injured. Reports indicate that the death toll from the continuing protests now stands at around 67. Protesters have, however, vowed to remain in the streets until their demands are heard by the military.
We are now out and we will not leave the streets until our demands are clear.
The recent demonstrations come after the Forces of Freedom and Change eased its tough stance against holding any dialogue with the military leaders. It has instead approved an initiative by the head of the UN Special Mission in Khartoum, Volker Perez, to hold talks to end the standoff. Perez has organized several meetings with the forces as part of efforts to make the Sudanese dialogue initiative successful.
The Forces of Freedom and Change made it clear that for the initiative to succeed, it must clearly address the demands of the protesters, which are represented in the civil state, the return of the military to the barracks, and the disassociation of the military institution from the political life in Sudan.
Meanwhile, the head of the Sovereignty Council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, is wishing those injured during the protests a speedy recovery. Burhan has also commended the police for maintaining security in the country and is urging the Sudanese people to obey the country's laws. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Now, environmentalists are warning that Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, could face environmental and food supply challenges in the near future due to increased real estate development in neighboring regions that previously held vast tracts of farmland. The Kiambu region that borders Nairobi is one of them and has been seeing more of its farms turned into homes by developers who are cashing in on increased demand for housing. Enoxi Kolia reports.
Situated about 14 kilometers away from the Kenyan capital Nairobi is the town of Kiambu and its environs. Kiambu County, as the devolved administrative unit is known locally, was once one of the country's leading agricultural zones, but that is slowly changing.
Nairobi City has been growing and expanding into neighboring counties like Kiambu County, where we are now. Traditionally, Kiambu has been a food-producing zone, but the expansion of Kenya's capital city has seen farmlands here converted into real estate.
This road is Nairobi's Northern Bypass, a major link road meant to ease traffic congestion into and out of the Kenyan capital. It's also the geographical border between Nairobi and Kiambu. During the road's construction between 2009 and 2014, it meandered through coffee farms, but several years down the line, only pockets of these farms can be seen as residential areas emerge and construction work continues.
People have gone into those traditionally food baskets to get somewhere to put up their shelter. This is where land is cheaper, and it's cheaper because there is plenty of it, because these coffee estates are in 100 hectares and above.
Francis Ngige has been a laborer on this farm in Kiambu County since the year 2000. He has seen much of the central Kenyan region's farmlands disappear. Right in front of him, the new owner of his former farm is putting up commercial structures. The latest one is a fuel station.
The people I knew left. I don't know these new ones.
Nancy Gideiga, an environmentalist and the African Wildlife Foundation's country director, says Kenya is losing an important food production zone to urban development, and the impact of this could be felt soon.
These people require settlements, but do we necessarily need to live in these high agricultural areas? Could we have better planning? So there are many areas we could use for settlements if only there was proper planning. Then what is usable for agriculture needs to be left for agriculture. What is for water recharge, groundwater recharge, very, very important, also is required to be left open.
It is this environmental function of the green Kiambu areas to the capital city that worries her. She says if these areas disappear completely, the impact could be catastrophic.
Some countries would drill boreholes not to get water out of the ground but to recharge. So is that the direction we want to take for Nairobi? Or do we want to safeguard what is naturally recharge areas?
Production of some of these farmlands have gone down. Yeah, basically to increased cost of imports and many other factors. So these people want to have an investment that is better.
Nancy says that due to population increase in Nairobi, the expansion of the capital city should be done in areas that are less suitable for farming, while ensuring agriculture continues to thrive in the neighboring productive regions. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Kiambu, Kenya.
Right, well, let's check in on what's coming up in the business. Southern Africa region set for economic rebound this year after COVID-induced downturns in 2020 and 2021.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Right, it's time for the business now. Southern Africa is set for an economic rebound. According to the African Development Bank's outlook, the region is forecast to have grown by 3.2% in 2021 and will grow by 2.4% this year. It is a solid bounce back from the 6.3% decline suffered in 2020, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While the virus is still a threat, the severity of its spread and impact has lessened. Businesses in South Africa are feeling a lot more optimistic about an economic rebound. Small businesses were particularly hard hit during the pandemic, with hundreds having to close. Some businesses did weather the storm and have come back stronger. Libya's oil production has recovered to 1 million barrels a day after militias ended a 3-week blockade of several western fields. The move comes after the government reached a deal with a paramilitary force known as the Petroleum Facilities Guard. As Yasser Hakim now reports, oil exports account for 95% of Libya's revenue and 65% of its GDP.
The Libyan government's ability to end the blockade by militias on the major oil fields has paved the way for production to reach 1 million barrels per day, up from about 650,000. However, it's still well below expectations.
Since 2011, Libyan oil output significantly dropped. Our peak capacity should be 1.3 billion barrels per day, and according to OPEC, should reach 1.6 million and 2 million later. But we are unable due to the war. 300,000 barrels of production are for the local market, and 9,000 for exports.
Libya has the largest oil reserves in Africa, estimated at 40 billion barrels. and with a population of only 7 million people, should have been one of the richest in the continent. However, the infighting between political powers and corruption have prevented the people from benefiting from the abundance of wealth.
Libya's oil revenue distribution is the same since 2011. It's in the hands of the central government in Tripoli, and there are constant calls to amend the law to have a fair distribution, putting in account the cities that produce oil in the south and east. They don't receive enough money for development purposes or to improve the dire living conditions in these areas compared to the west, like Tripoli, who receive the largest share of income.
Now that the oil output is gradually increasing, experts like Ammar are proposing to redistribute the oil revenue. A third for the population, salaries and social services, a third to overhaul the rundown oil facilities and infrastructure damaged by the war, and a third for economic reforms. In spite of the latest breakthrough, experts say there will be a repeat of tensions and blockades on oil facilities. Oil output will only be restored unless security is stabilized and free and fair elections take place in Libya. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Tanzania and Burundi have signed an agreement to construct a $900 million railway line that would link the two countries. According to Tanzania's finance ministry, the two neighboring East African nations are searching for financial backers for the project. The 282-kilometer line is the latest step towards Tanzania's goal of building a 2,561-kilometer railway network in its bid to boost regional trade. It'll connect the western Tanzanian town of Uvinza with the Burundian capital of Gitega. Once completed, the rail network is expected to ferry more than 1 million tons of cargo between the two East African countries. Now, over in West Africa, Nigeria's movie industry doubled ticket sales in 2021 as it emerged stronger from the impact of COVID. And as Kelechi Emekalam reports, analysts expect the rapidly growing middle class in the country to help its film industry to post an even better performance this year.
The Silverbird Cinema in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, is a hub for entertainment. And it's a favorite spot for movie enthusiast Anita Eloha, who doesn't miss a week. She's now catching up on lost times at the peak of COVID-19 when cinemas were shut down.
It has been exhilarating. At least I come here and have fun most of the times with my friends and also other people. So I'm very, very happy that the cinema has been opened again.
Nigeria's cinema industry suffered a major shortfall in 2020, an impact of the COVID-19 lockdown. But it made a strong comeback in 2021 as weekend movie ticket sales hit $5.79 million from $2.89 million in 2020. Operators say good content, technology upgrade, and adherence to safety protocols helped in boosting customers' confidence.
It was mostly due to having producers produce more films. We have put in safety measures, all over the world. In the cinema sector, you will not find any case of, no COVID cases traced to the cinema. Do you understand? So that has helped us as a business.
Many see people returning to the cinemas as a good sign for economic recovery, one that should be sustained.
We're confident as long as we have good content, it can only get better. And we, as much as possible, will have to run with the time.
We need to ensure that anything that may affect the cinema industry adversely should be avoided in order for us to continue growing that sector, in order for us to sustain the jobs. I advocate that people should just move about their businesses, but then have to protect themselves in order for us to not to kill and distort the flow of the economy.
Nigeria's film sector contributes 2.3% to the country's GDP, with the nation driven by growing middle class, increased investments in movie production, and millennials who've come to embrace the cinema culture. industry players are optimistic that the sector is on the right path to recovery and could experience a boom in 2022. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And here's what's coming up on Africa Live Sport. Tournament hosts Cameroon stride into the last 16 of the Africa Cup of Nations.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures